Can you daily a vintage Rolex watch? The answer is yes, of course. If you are stubborn enough, you can make anything happen. I think the better question is, should you daily a vintage Rolex watch? Well, this video is really going to be from experience because I do own a vintage Rolex watch. I owned this watch for about 5 years, and I did in fact daily this watch for about a year or so. So let's talk about it. I wanted to get my first Rolex watch. I couldn't really afford a brand new watch, and I also couldn't really buy a brand new watch from the 80s. Even back then, it was still very difficult to buy a Rolex sports model from the AD. I went on the Craigslist and I purchased this 1979 Rolex Datejust. It's a 36mm model with the caliber 30-35 automatic movement, a quick set date one, and a diameter of 36mm. I love this timepiece. I don't regret buying it, and I don't feel like I was sort of settling for something lesser than. It's just a different experience owning a vintage watch versus owning a brand new watch. With 5 years of ownership and wear, I can confidently give you some advice on how to make your vintage Rolex watch more comfortable, more appropriate for daily wear. So first, let's talk about the movement. One of the big things about Rolex watches, one of the things that keeps the value of these watches so high is the movement, the engine powering the watch. So as I mentioned, this one is powered by the caliber 30-35 automatic movement, and it's one of these legendary bulletproof movements. But even the best engine, even the best movement still needs servicing. I serviced this watch about a year ago or so, and it's keeping fantastic time. Even before the servicing, it was still keeping great time. However, I noticed there was a slight problem with the date change. At midnight, the date would snap as it should, but it wouldn't snap all the way to the new date. It would snap sort of halfway. And around 6 a.m., it would complete the turn. It wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't something that I want to keep having to occur for the long time, because I thought, hey, maybe that will break the movement even further. Clearly something was wrong. Also, I didn't know the service history of the watch when I bought it, so I decided, hey, why not service the watch? It cost me about 500 Canadian dollars to fix the movement and to service the watch, which is a lot of money. For that money, you can buy a pretty nice Seiko or a lot of other micro-brand watches. On top of that, this $500 bill was a little bit lower than what I should have paid. It's just I have some friends, so I was able to get a bit of a deal. If you buy one of these watches, budget for servicing. Even if the watch is working perfectly right now, it is going to be in some cases 40-50-year-old watch, 50-40-year-old movement that will need upkeep, will need servicing, and will need repairs. The second thing I want to talk about is the crystal. So these watches have acrylic crystals, which are essentially plastic crystals. If you've been following this YouTube channel for a while, you probably know that when I just got this watch, I did replace the crystal. There was nothing really wrong with the crystal. It was the original crystal from 1979. What bothered me about the crystal was the fact that the magnifier glass sort of worn out, and it wasn't magnifying to the 2.5 times like it should. It was magnifying to about 1.5 times. So the magnification wasn't exactly there, and it was sort of bothering me, so I replaced the crystal. But even if I didn't replace the crystal, I would still have to be mindful of the crystal, because these plastic crystals are very easy to scratch. The upside of that, they're also very easy to buff out. It's not like a sapphire crystal where you can really put some wear on the watch and you don't really have to worry about it. These plastic crystals are softer. Even putting your hand in a pocket might scratch the crystal. Keys, doorknobs, things like that. So you do have to be a little bit more careful, more mindful with these vintage watches. Another thing you have to keep in mind is that these watches are smaller. The 36mm diameter is kind of small by today's standards. Even though the watches are shrinking, which is a good thing, I think a lot of manufacturers realize that these 42mm plus watches are not for everyone. Now we're starting to see more and more 39mm models. Nevertheless, 36 is still quite a bit smaller than 39mm. If you have a smaller wrist, or if you prefer smaller watches, that's not necessarily going to be a big problem for you. And it's not a problem for me, because even though I don't really have a small wrist, I would say I have about a medium to larger wrist, about 7.5 inches, I think these watches fit really well because they have a longer lug-to-lug distance. So if you're looking at a vintage Rolex Datejust specifically, try one on, of course, see how it fits, but I wouldn't worry too much about the size. Also, the way this case is proportioned, I think it looks better in the 36mm size versus the 41mm size like the modern ones have. The sizing of the case is going to be more of a personal preference. Nevertheless, it is still a consideration you have to make when you're buying your daily wear watch. These watches will wear smaller than modern ones. When this watch was brand new, it had 100 meters of water resistance. Now, about 45 years later, does it still have 100 meters of water resistance? When I serviced the watch, we did replace the rubber gasket, which would help with the overall water resistance, but I wouldn't necessarily take this watch swimming. I don't think it has good water resistance anymore. First of all, the construction of this case doesn't allow for great water resistance. These engine turned bezels can be popped off very easily with a simple tool, and that's actually how you replace the crystal. So the crystal is not the most secure on the dial. Also, the crown gaskets wear out over time as you wind the movement and set the time. And lastly, the case back itself, even though the gasket is brand new, I'm not so sure how good the water resistance is. On a daily basis, washing dishes, things like that, it's probably fine. But if it's really hard downpour, I'd probably take this watch off of your wrist. When buying a vintage Rolex, you do have to ask yourself, what does your daily life look like? Do you encounter a lot of water? If you do, well, probably a vintage Rolex is not right for you. But if you work in the office and you just really deal with water when you wash your hands or wash dishes or something like that, well, it's probably fine if you have serviced the watch and if you have checked the gaskets and they're okay. The last thing I want to mention is the bracelet. Depending on the era, depending on the type of watch you buy, you will probably either go for something like a Jubilee bracelet or an Oyster style bracelet. Both of these bracelets tend to wear out, as the previous owners have enjoyed these watches over the years, and believe me, these Datejusts have great stories to tell because people bought them to enjoy them, to wear them on a daily basis. That's why I love a humble Datejust, because these are not safe queens. These are real world tested watches. As the time went on, these bracelets did stretch out, and a stretch on a vintage Rolex bracelet is a very common thing. There are fixes to this issue. However, these fixes are not something that you can do yourself. Unless you have these specialty tools and specialty skills, you probably want to send it to someone else to get the bracelet tightened down, and that can cost quite a bit of money. Back in the day, I got a quote for this bracelet, and I think it was something like 600 or 700 Canadian dollars, and it wasn't anyone local that could do it. I had to mail the bracelet across Canada to get it done. It was a few month wait, and I decided against tightening the bracelet for the reason of pricing, but another reason was actually the sizing of the watch. As it is right now on this bracelet, it fits my wrist pretty well. However, if I were to tighten this bracelet, I think it wouldn't fit my wrist anymore because the links would be tighter, and then I would have to buy more links, which would add more money. And also these sort of vintage links are kind of difficult to find because you got a lot of counterfeits. So then you deal with the whole new issue of finding these links and sourcing them and buying them. So that would cost me probably about $1,000 for the bracelet alone. It's not really worth it to me personally. So what I did, I went on a website called Etsy, and I actually bought an aftermarket bracelet. No, this is not a real Rolex bracelet, unfortunately, but it was only $80 and it fits really well. The quality of these vintage Rolex bracelets is not the greatest. It has a pressed metal clasp and it's kind of jangly. So getting an aftermarket bracelet fits the aesthetic of the watch pretty well. I don't think it changes the watch too much. And this way, I don't really have to worry about one of the links giving out or the bracelet being too stretched out and sort of uncomfortable to wear, because you do have that other aspect of a stretched out bracelet where you're worried that one of the links will break and you can lose the watch. Well, getting something aftermarket for $100 or so you just have a peace of mind. If you take all these things into consideration, the movement and the servicing of the movement, the size of the watch, the crystal, water resistance, and the bracelet, and if you're okay with all these things, and if you're okay to do a little bit of extra work to fix some of the things that need to be fixed, I think absolutely you can and should daily your vintage Rolex. It's just an awesome experience, and you're continuing the history. You're writing another chapter in the book of this awesome watch that has been enjoyed by the previous owner for years and years. I would suggest you get another watch, a beater watch, maybe something like a Seiko or a G-Shock, depending on your lifestyle, for those vacations, for swimming, for playing tennis, for playing golf, for all the other activities that you don't want to put your Rolex through. So you can wear it on a daily, but then when you're doing something a little bit more intense, you can put on your beater watch. That's just my suggestion. I appreciate you watching this video until the end. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content like this. And leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about wearing a vintage Rolex watch on a daily basis. Would you do it? Would you not do it? Are you currently doing it? Leave your thoughts below. I always enjoy reading your comments. Thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you next time. Bye.